like a cool, like, hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of Voices from the Vault. This is, I'm Nathan. Hi, I'm Nathan. Vampire the Masquerade books on the 7s.
It's raining blood on Blood Alley. So today we are reviewing Fear and Loathing 77 from the Storytellers Vault. This is really a great book. One of the, again, sticking with the theme of doing really early books. This is one of the earliest books on the Vault. I actually didn't buy this book until recently, but it's been on my wish list for forever, and I know the author. We have the same alma mater, and we both live down here in LA now. So I always knew the product was going to be great, and I was really intrigued by it. But as a not really a Chronicle guy, I never bought it. But I wanted this. This is the third episode of Voices from the Vault, and I wanted to expand. You know, we did a clan book first, and then we did a city book, and so now this is a Chronicle, and it was written by Brad C. Hodson, and much like the last book, this is almost entirely of his creation. He thanked some artists, I think, beyond his special thanks section. This was entirely the creation of Mr. Brad C. Hodson. It's a fascinating sort of blend of a well-known author, Hunter Thompson, wrote a book called Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, one of my favorite books. It influenced me to write my first novel. But it's not a novel itself. It's part of new journalism, which means it's journalism written from the perspective of the journalist, and it has dialogue, and so it reads a lot like fiction. But they're actually real people doing really crazy stuff in that book. And so he took inspiration from Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas to make it into a chronicle, basically. And the way that he did that was pretty much by exploiting Dr. Gonzo, the character, the pseudonym that Samoan lawyer from Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas took in the book. His name was Archie Acosta. He was a real person. He was a very large man, and he took a lot of drugs and scared a lot of people, and eventually died in Mexico doing some cocaine smuggling. So he was a colorful guy in his own right and questionable moral standing, but, you know, arguably a good guy. And he is, in fact, the primary antagonist, the bad guy in this film, or in this chronicle. His name is Zeta, and he's like a big, crazy Mexican gangster dude. So the relation between Zeta and Archie Acosta and actually who he's really based on is the pseudonym, you know, character in Fear and Loathing, which is Dr. Gonzo, is tenuous at best. Like if somebody rewrote this and just gave it a new name and said something crazy in Vegas or whatever, and made no mention of any relation to Fear and Loathing, like I don't think I would have got it. I wouldn't have made the connection. So on a metaphorical level, it's not a really strong metaphor, like for the work. It's not like I saw the book and I was like, okay, this is kind of campy, gimmicky, sort of weird. I don't know why anyone would do this. And I didn't buy the book. I wasn't upset by somebody like, you know, incorporating Hunter S. Thompson's work into a chronicle. I just didn't see the value in it. And then I bought it because I wanted to read a chronicle. And this was a chronicle I knew was written by a very talented author. You know, it was one of the earlier books, which also fit the mold of Voices from the Vault. So for that reason, I chose the book. I mean, I could go on and on, but like, How did you feel about the book?
Well, yeah. So anytime you do like a chronicle review, it's very difficult to give it like a thorough review without giving away like spoilers, because it's a story. I was intrigued when I first saw it come out because I am a big fan of Hunter S. Thompson, and, you know, I've read a lot of his books, and I'm very into like the 70s culture from a storytelling perspective, because it's very similar to the world that we live in today. You know, it's modern for all intents and purposes, but it doesn't have all of the story hangups that you get in a modern story where everyone has cell phones, everyone, has the internet, everyone has all the information off the top of their head. There was a time where you just sort of yelled into the ether and hoped people heard you. I'm not a fan of like bad things happening to people, but I like the storytelling of like the crime drama. I assumed based on the title it was going to have something to do with that, but I hadn't gotten around to reading it, and I was interested to read it, but I was a little concerned because chronicles, or whatever you want to call them, stories released for most games, I find to be severely lacking. So I didn't have like super high expectations. I was like, it's probably just going to be more of that. But surprisingly, I was very entertained by this story. I like that the way that the author presents it, and he presents it in such a way where he's not trying to trick you into believing that it's anything other than what it is. It's a very fast-paced story. It's very kind of like seat of your pants. So I really enjoyed what was presented, and I enjoyed that the person who wrote it gets into the same sorts of stuff that I get into. When I tell Vampire the Masquerade stories, a lot of my inspiration comes from crime movies and mafia movies and, just stuff like that. Having something presented that's just 4-chapter sort of scenario that's real quick, I really appreciate it. And I like the sense of dread. I like that the author sort of presents your entry into the Sabbat with the anticipation that your characters are kind of younger and you're dealing with some like scary and kind of freaky and not all that awesome characters that are your antagonists. I have a real bad habit when I read something from the Storytellers Vault of pulling out my books and going, is this correct? Is this accurate?
Fuck you.
Yeah, and I can't help it. It's just, I read so many vampire books that I became that guy. And I don't like being that guy. So, I just do it sort of like for my own personal edification.
So did it pass muster or what? We're all dying to know.
Yeah, so surprisingly, of course there's a bunch of like made up characters in here, and that's fine. The author should make up their characters. But there were a bunch of characters in here where I was like, that character's ridiculous. That can't be a real character. One of which, if you notice, there's a Malkavian anti-tribute that I believe is an archbishop in here. And she is presented like at the very end of the book. She has this thing where Malkavians all have a derangement. Well, this particular Malkavian's derangement is that every night she follows a different path. And when I read that, I was immediately upset at the author. I was like, that is so stupid. Like, that's not a good character. I don't think that can happen. And then I looked and found that character in the back of Chaos Factor. So it's a real character. And it's literally the character out of that book copied into this one. So I was like, oh no, you're okay.
Right on.
I don't know if I would have included that character, but you got like, that's something White Wolf made. Sorry, it's there. It's in print.
Goddamn
you did your job. So yeah, I was pleasantly surprised. I did have a couple of tiny criticisms. I don't know if we're at the point yet where we want to start.
Let's do a summary of the book first.
Okay.
So yeah, but for what it's worth, commentary on my part, it was beautiful because I come up with a new reason why I want to do this show with you like every time. But here's another really, really good one is when you read, specifically you read these books, I'm sure that you do what you said. You think about them in terms of like, well, does this really actually mesh with canon? And I think every writer in the vault like tries to do that, but getting someone to actually sit down and read one of our books with not only like a critical eye, but a critical eye that's trained, like I've read every single book and I've done 200 shows on these books and I'm saying these are canonical characters. That's valuable for Vault authors. So right on, man. Getting back to this book, it's like you said, it's a Sabbat book, right? So it's a Sabbat chronicle. That's fascinating.
Which I'm a Sabbat guy, so got me there.
Yeah, and it's a neonate level game. Not that like many chronicles are meant for high level characters, but the other thing is that it's pretty railroady. It's not a sandbox in my opinion, but I don't know how it's a Sabbat game, so like your characters can kind of do anything. I mean, they can just burn the whole place down. They're Sabbat. Yeah. But when the way that it's written, although it's very railroady, is perfect because there's like all these ticking clocks and like ridiculously powerful characters that you're like, all right, you're going to attack this guy? Yeah? That's what you want to do? All right, you lose. That's kind of cool. So I feel like it's a pretty well written chronicle. I'm also not a big fan of chronicles, but for what it's worth, I really just have avoided them most of my career as a storyteller. So I'm also not the best, voice when it comes to reading these things. Maybe they're all this good, but I thought it was really good. I thought it was a little railroady, but I felt like the railroad was necessary for getting Sabbat characters to go from Act 1 to Act 2 and Act 3. And I felt like almost in every instance, the book, I felt like characters would probably do what he was expecting. There was a lot of like, well, if they do this, if they do this.
Yeah.
But so many of the situations were straightforward violence. The main story is you're trying to rescue a spy. You're a Sabbat, and one of your spies has been kidnapped by the Anarchs, right? And you're trying to rescue this guy. And so you could just like not take the job, but then like you'll get killed. It's the Sabbat. Like you could just like attack the compound, but there's like hella guys there. You'll probably just die, You can try and reason with these people, but they're not. I mean, it's written into like what, as a storyteller, they would say to these people. So like they're not interested in logic or reason. They want their money, and you got my money? Yes, no,
Right.
okay, bye. I felt like that was workable. I'm a crime author, so from a crime writing perspective, I felt like it worked. I felt like there were some parts that kind of fell apart, and I was like, I don't know, they might like do something else. There was a couple instances where I was like, okay, I can see the characters basically just abandoning this mission, being like, this dude is crazy. I'm out of here. Why don't we all just like go to another town? And he addresses that. He's like, well, they can bounce to like San Francisco or whatever. They can go back to Mexico, which actually happens at some point. But as an overarching commentary on the book, I felt like it was really good because it was convincing for me as a storyteller, that the characters would most likely take this course of action, and if they took a different course of action, it would be manageable because of the ticking clocks and the powerful nature of the adversaries. So I definitely ended up feeling like it was a book worth reviewing and worth buying. But without going through chapter by chapter, do you have any other like overarching commentary about?
I'll echo you in the fact that I enjoy that it is a little Sabbat story chronicle module, and I like that it is. You said that it's kind of railroady, and I felt like it was. I felt like each of the 4 acts, the author was just like, here's a thing that this story would want to happen. However you get here, that's up to you, but this is what I expect for the story. So I didn't necessarily think it was like railroady. I think a lot of the other modules I've read are every single step is kind of like written out for you. And I think that this storyteller, this author kind of knew like there's probably a dozen things that they're going to do. Hopefully it's one of these things. This is how it could work out. So I didn't really feel it was like railroady in that sense. I didn't really like how the story ended. I didn't really feel like that kind of turned out the way that I would have anticipated it. And power level wise, some of the characters that you end up interacting with, those seemed a little like, hero characters to me. Like they didn't really fit the Camarilla Sabbat Anarch kind of scenario. But I like that when things happen, like when a character betrays another character or things go off the rails, the storyteller does provide like legitimate concepts for why that would happen. So I found that very entertaining. To me, this would be perfect for like a one-night session with a bunch of friends. This is a perfect beer and pretzels scenario, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean that in a good way. It doesn't take a lot of prep. Your friends can all sit down, make whatever Sabbat character they want. The author is very quick to tell you like, hey, this is the perfect story for stereotypes. Don't force anybody to put a lot of work into this. This is sit down, make the single note stereotype Sabbat character, because this is just all about having like reckless abandon Sabbat interaction that everybody kind of like comes to expect from that sect.
Yep, I totally agree. I feel like this was intended to be ran as a one-off in essentially one day, and that you could break it up, but it was kind of expected that you would basically go through the loop, through the hoops that he expected. Otherwise, your characters are, I mean, kind of dumb. These are definitely, the way that he presents it is, in my opinion, the smartest option for these sort of criminally minded people. Don't give up the money too quickly, whatever. Go back and fight these people and, you know, be sneaky.
Yeah.
Blah, blah, blah. Without getting into like the exact details of each act, I feel like, yeah, it was a really well-written book, and highly recommend people buy it. The thing that do you want to go through chapter by chapter, or you want to get into the critical section?
Well, let's get into the critical section.
The critical section.
The critical section.
You already know we enjoy the book immensely. However, like every other book, you know, there's it's not perfect. There's nothing perfect about any of these books that I've ever seen. So let's get into some of the criticisms that we might have. I would like to open the door to you first, please.
So that way I don't step on your throat and then in your eye. Structurally, I found myself constantly, because I don't like, you have said that you've done so many of these, you sit down and just bang them out. I read a few pages, 10, 15, whatever pages a day. So this 70-something page thing, it took me like a week to read it, maybe 8 days or something. And I would constantly be like, wait, where was I? Because things happen so fast. I was like, I need a table in the beginning of every act that says, these are the main story beats. This is what happens, internal summary. And the fact that there are no internal summaries throughout the book means that if you somehow space or whatever, you pick up the book and you're like, what the fuck is going on here?
Yeah.
So I feel like Brad should have done internal summaries in sidebars, bulleted list of the things that happened in the act. Maybe a flow chart, but I think that might have come off as overkill because I don't think flow charts were ever used in the Chronicles, so that might have been sort of like out of character for the you know, whatever, for the IP. But I feel strongly like he flubbed the structure by not having internal summaries. I don't know, this isn't really belong in the critical section, but on some level I was disturbed by the torture scene, which is unusual because, well, I don't want to get into it. It's unusual for me to be disturbed by torture. This one did.
Is that disturbed in a good way or a bad way?
No, I didn't like it. And I mean, it's fine. It was great. No, it's fine. Let me take that back, because Brad is a great writer and it was done very well. It just, I was like, damn, they're really fucking this guy up. Mm-hmm. And it started with, it's not a spoiler, but they cut this guy's fingers off. And I was like, ouch. You know, like, I don't know why. I mean, there's Whoopi Goldberg movies where people get their fingers cut off. So, like, you know, I don't know what it was, but it kind of went from there. And I was like, damn, they are fucking, if you don't, whatever, then they're going to torture this guy to death. And I was like, God damn, man. Like, I don't know whether it was so well written that I was really immersed in the story and I was seeing this torture scene or something, but it was pretty rough. I was like, dang. And again, not a criticism, really, just like as a person, as a reader, I found that scene jarring, and that's probably a good thing. It's a horror book. And that sincerely came across to me, not just in the beginning when he was like, oh, people in their excess, and this is a story about excess, but like, dude, and that torture scene comes up, I was like, yeesh.
Okay, so I have a couple of small criticisms. First, and I don't know if you're going to share this, but I got to be totally truthful here. I didn't care for his dialogue. In most Chronicles, most module books, you know, they do include dialogue. You know, there's things that they want the characters to say, and, you know, information needs to be passed back and forth. And honestly, I just, you know, reading his dialogue as he presented it, I just felt like it was kind of a little hammy. I felt like as I read it, okay, I'll replace this dialogue with the pertinent information if I run it, because I just don't care for what he's provided. So I didn't really like that. The fourth act, I didn't really care for how it plays out in the end. I didn't really care for the ending of the story, and it kind of got a little like confusing and strange. And also there is a Tremere character in the book, plays a pretty prominent role. And
are you gonna say the magic item?
Well, yeah, so there's actually two things. One of which is there is an amulet that I felt like was completely unnecessary.
Right.
There are similar things available in like Archons and Templars that can be used that aren't magic items. Additionally, when the when the Tremere character introduced themselves, they used, I don't want to say incorrect verbiage. The nomenclature was very consistent with what a mage would say when they introduced themselves, and not at all consistent with what a Tremere would say. Although none of the words were inherently wrong, they just, in all of the times I've read Tremere or played Tremere, I've never heard a player use those terms as a Tremere, and I've never read them in a book when a Tremere introduces themselves. So the terms were technically correct, but they were more correct for the mage variant of a Tremere and not a vampiric Tremere. I felt like, okay, this guy knows Tremere, or this guy knows mage, but maybe he's a tiny bit not accurate with his Tremere.
And I forgot about the amulet. I also felt like the amulet was hokey. I'm down with hokiness. Like I wrote Clan Book Keosid and rewrote Keosid to be like undead Indiana Jones and constantly hunting magic items and stuff. And so like I love magic items. They just have to be like not MacGuffins.
Right. And that was really what it was for me, was like,
MacGuffin.
Okay, so you have a character that is somehow related to an Archon. We'll just put it out there. And there is a book that has stuff specifically designed for Archons to consume blood in the Vauldery, and it makes the blood inert. And I just felt like having a magic item that basically does the same thing would be harder to construct. You could have just said this ritual, which has been written for this purpose, would do the same thing. So to me, it felt like, okay, the person just didn't know that existed, or, or wanted to make a hokey magic item, and that's fine. But, I would have done it differently.
I didn't know about that ritual either, for what it's worth, but I rarely resort to magic items. And when I do, it's usually like, full hog, like knee deep in these things. You got a library of these, making magic items and selling them to fairies and stuff, So the magic item popped out as like, what is this? Like, why is this here? There was some feeding scenes that I was just like, okay, guy, I get it. He's an asshole. And, and like he was giving drugs to these women and then feeding on them. And the scenes were really, I mean, they were disturbing, but I'm trying to use different verbs, They were, I feel like they were gratuitous.
That's amazing that you thought of that word, because it was right on the tip of my tongue.
Yeah. They weren't grotesque so much as they were, it was a theater. The entire book is a theater of the grotesque, to use the traditional term of like enjoying this sort of nastiness. But like, I think it could have been done in a more tasteful way. Har har. And yeah, there were two feeding scenes that were a little bit jarring, because it was like really a lot of abuse of these people. And I think the author was just trying to get across how abusive Zeta is. Yeah, I hear you. So it was just like all of a sudden turned it up to 11, and I was like, whoa, guy. I would run it for people who haven't run Sabbat games but are aware of Vampire the Masquerade. I think first-time players would struggle with this chronicle unless they were also sick puppies like me. But even me just reading it, like, it depends on how it was done, like the torture scenes and the feeding scenes. You might be just like, what the fuck is this?
Right.
And I'm not sure that you could really prepare somebody for that unless they, knew that this is an extreme horror game. It could be one of those things where, like, don't play this with just anyone. This is it's not that it's hard to run. It's just that it's a Sabbat game, and it's written to be like, even for guys like us, we're like, yep, that's the Sabbat.
Yeah, it's not the most violent thing I've ever read, but it is definitely a full bore Sabbat experience, and I think for that it does a pretty decent job. It's not a difficult read. It's a quick read because it's a quick tempoed story. It's worth getting, and it's worth checking out. Thank you everybody for watching. Thank you for listening. If you're listening to the podcast, I'll talk to you later.